Hey everyone, welcome back, and we're getting into our third part of our training seminar today, and we're going to talk about a loaded question that may seem simple, but as we go through the different steps, it is much more complex than it actually sounds. And we're going to be talking about flexibility today, and it's about having appropriate length in all the muscles is our kind of our tagline. And I want to give you some different scientific rationales for flexibility, what flexibility is, reasons why you do it, what causes flexibility problems, and from there, then at the very end, we're just going to talk about what to do. And it's going to be very complex, it's going to be very overwhelming, but and we'll say this at the end, one of the wonderful things about this is that's why you have us. We're there to help walk you through it, to map it out for you, to help you see what exactly you do, but this is the rationale on why we do what we're doing. I've taken a bunch of notes, so if I look away for a few seconds, it's me just reading off some of the notes that I made. So when we're talking about flexibility training, the main thing that people think is, well, it's just stretching. I'm going to go in the gym, I'm going to stretch around, I'm going to do this. And that's not necessarily what, stretching is a portion of flexibility training, but it's not what is, the right thing to do for everyone. And there's multiple different ways that you can stretch too. So, and also too, the other point that I want to make is people think that like when someone can do a full splits or when they can have a super flexible muscle that has a giant range of motion. And that isn't necessarily a good thing, because proper flexibility, what makes a properly flexible muscle, is one that has its optimal length, the length that it's supposed to be at. And anything that is too shortened or too lengthened both present problems. Too shortened means that it's in a too much of a tightened position, and the opposite of that tight muscle is going to be too lengthened, which means it's in a weakened position. So both of those present problems. So we want them to be at their optimal length. Each muscle has a length that it's supposed to be at, and it should be at its optimal length. And the other important thing to identify what flexibility is to have the appropriate length or the appropriate range of motion in all joints. So if a joint is restricted in its range of motion, that's where a lot of the pain is going to come from, because a lot of the, any joint restriction comes from tight muscles, and a lot of that pain is going to radiate into the joint, and injuries can happen there whenever the range of motion is limited in the joint. So that, that is one thing. Another thing that we want to look at is talking about flexibility is there's a term called dynamic flexibility. And dynamic flexibility has to do with there is a relationship between your skeletal, your muscular, and your nervous system. And your nervous system controls what the muscles do. It sends the signals to the muscles in order to be able to move. So greater neuromuscular control, or greater control from the nervous into the muscular system, is going to also help out with flexibility. So neuromuscular training, as we've talked about in previous demonstrations, also helps to dynamically improve the flexibility of someone's body. And so when we talk more specifically about neuromuscular training, so you're like, okay, dynamically, the body has to have the ability to control the muscular system, but how does that look? What does neuromuscular training mean? Well, there's 4 parts to every movement that your body has. It's the agonist, the prime mover, the major muscle. If you're pushing out with your chest or doing a pressing, that's your chest as the prime mover. But then you have a synergist, which is the muscle that is, also helping the prime mover to move. It's just the prime mover that moves the muscle. It's also the synergist that also helps. And then you have other components that are a stabilizer, the stabilizing muscle group in that particular movement, and the antagonist, or the opposite of the prime mover. All 4 of those have their own place in each individual movement. And the greater the neuromuscular control, the greater that you have the ability to control each of those 4 movements in each movement that you're doing. So it's very, very important that we focus on that and think about that it's much more than just stretching. Because when we get back into the original concept of limited range of motion, limited joint range of motion, that comes down to muscular imbalances, tight muscles. And whenever you have a tight muscle, it is stemmed from a muscular imbalance. A muscular imbalance, if we talk about a muscle is supposed to be at this length, if it's shortened, that is a muscular imbalance because it's shorter than it's supposed to be. And its antagonist or its opposite muscle is going to be weakened or lengthened. That is a muscular imbalance. So the examples that are really easy for people to understand are, like the bicep. You have the bicep that's tight, its antagonist is the tricep, it's going to be naturally weakened or loosened. That is a muscular imbalance. Same thing with like the quads or hamstrings. If the quad is overly tight, the hamstrings are naturally going to be more lengthened. That is a muscular imbalance. There's muscular imbalances that people have throughout their entire body, and improving those muscular imbalances through proper flexibility work can do everything that we're talking about. Greater range of motion in the joints, greater dynamic movements, greater neuromuscular control. So limiting muscular imbalances, the core of flexibility work, that is going to just help everything out in your body. So it is more than just stretching. And so let's look at what a muscular imbalance can lead to. So we know that a muscular imbalance, a tight muscle and its opposite antagonist, weak muscle, can lead to altered joint motion. So what happens? So what you have, first of all, you have your muscular imbalance, whatever that may be. That is going to then lead a muscular imbalance. Let's say, for instance, that a weakened lower back is a muscular imbalance because the back is weak, and then it's going to have overly tight muscles in other areas. That's going to result in poor posture. So a muscular imbalance will always lead to poor posture. If you have lower body muscular imbalances, that's going to lead to altered posture in your knees, your feet, your hips, all of that. So muscular imbalances always lead to poor posture, which then, if you have poor posture, then that causes you to have improper movement. And that improper movement will lead to injury. And you may not always get injured, but the risk of injury goes up significantly if those other things are there. So you look at having muscular imbalances, which leads to poor posture, which leads to altered movement, which is going to lead to injury. It happens all the time. And so you can minimize your risk of injury, you can improve your performance, you can have a better quality of life by purely improving muscular imbalances. The core of flexibility training is improving muscular imbalances. There's a term called relative flexibility, meaning that your body is always going to choose the path of least resistance. So a muscular imbalance where an overly tight muscle shifts the structure of your body, or it shifts the posture and movement of your body, it's going to do that because it's going to move in the place that it's most comfortable. In order to shift that and move it back to the way it's supposed to move, that can be very, very difficult because your body is always wanting to do things relatively, using the things that are of least resistance. So the muscular imbalance, we're going to focus on that because that is the main thing with flexibility training. It's caused from the tight prime mover. There's also then getting into things like we've talked about synergistic dominance. So for instance, one of the reasons why there's so many knee or shoulder issues, let's focus on shoulder problems, is that the rotator cuff typically is a stability muscle. It is not a movement muscle. So if in a pressing movement, a twisting movement, something dynamic in nature, if you have your main muscle that's supposed to be doing that movement and it's synergist, and if there's any breakdown in a muscular imbalance, if the synergist is too dominant, if the prime mover, the main muscle, is not strong enough and the synergist has to take over, the synergist isn't going to be strong enough either, and therefore the stabilizing muscle will have to take workload. The stabilizing muscle is supposed to stabilize weight. It's not supposed to create movement. So if a prime mover is weak, if a synergist takes on too much dominance, then what's going to happen based on that whole pattern that I talked to you about is then the stabilizer is going to take on too much force, which causes the injury. That's why you get too much force to be put on stabilizing muscles, and when those stabilizing muscles can't handle the force, they tear. ACLs, shoulders, Achilles, you name it, it can be stemmed back to that. And then ultimately, there's a term called arthrokinematic dysfunction, which means that arthrokinematic is the function of the joint. And so whenever the joint is supposed to move in a particular way and that's altered, then you're going to have joint issues because it's not functioning or moving in the way that it's supposed to be. You can see this whole cycle of events that comes into appropriate flexibility training. And in fact, the thing that I want to focus on right now is what we call the cumulative injury cycle. There's a whole cycle and series of events. It's not A to B, 1 to 10. They all go in this big circle and cycle, and they all work hand to hand for the rationale of why injuries happen. So let's cover those real quick. I have them listed down. These are not listed in importance. They all go together. One goes to this, one goes to that. Trauma happens. Trauma to a muscle happens, which then causes inflammation, which then causes spasms, which then causes adhesions, which then changes the neuromuscular control, which then causes imbalances, which then causes trauma, which then causes inflammation, which then causes spasms, which then causes adhesions, which then causes altered neuromuscular control, which then causes imbalances. You get the picture. It goes in a circle. And the end result is injury. That's what causes the injury. It's not one thing. It's unless someone walks up to you with a hammer, smashes you in the knee, takes a baseball bat, and knocks you upside the head. Unless that's the case, there's a reason why injuries happen, and it's this cumulative injury cycle. So, and a lot of it has to do with pattern overload. If you are repeating one motion with a continuous overload, doing the same motion over time, that puts too much stress on the body, and that's why it's important to alter your workouts, change the range of motions, do stability training, do strength training, change your training so that pattern overload and making your workout diversified will help you in preventing you from getting into that cumulative injury cycle. I want to wrap it up really quick. I'm getting close to my time. So all of that. So then, what are the different components of flexibility training? Number one is corrective flexibility training, which completely focuses on improving muscular imbalances and improving joint range of motion. And it's done through static stretching and a self-myofascial release foam roller, or let me grab it really quick. So self-myofascial release, which can be done with a foam roller. It can also be done with a body back buddy, something like that, and static stretching. It helps to improve muscular imbalances and joint range of motion. Then we get into active flexibility, which is purely extending the joint tissue. So you're just mimicking movement, and what you're trying to do is extend the joint. You're trying to extend the tissue to help improve the range of motion in the joint. And when you do any sort of movement and you do that and you're trying to increase the range of motion, both its agonist and its antagonist, the prime mover and the antagonist, are both going to work together and improve joint range of motion. And finally, dynamic. Doing different things, whether it's movement or whatever it may be. Some people term it as warming up. You can do it in different ranges of motions, but that is going to help improve neuromuscular control. They are in order: corrective, active, and then dynamic. But the last thing is, don't worry about it. All of that, I know it's a lot to comprehend, but that's why we're here to walk you through it, set up a plan for you, show you how to integrate all of these different things, and so you improve your flexibility. I hope that helps you today, and I appreciate you joining us. Have a great day.
When you feel that something's wrong, I'll shelter you and keep you warm. I'll never let you walk alone.